Welcome to the inner world of filmmaking. I'm your host, Tammy McGarrow. I'm an editor, podcaster, and still photographer. In this show, I will interview filmmakers in all facets of production and distribution. I have the talented Lukas Hassel, who is an actor, director, and writer. He's worked on shows like Blacklist, Elementary, Law & Order, and many more. Welcome, Lukas. Happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you for asking me. I'm excited to be here.
So I always like to know, what's the road into acting? Like, what got you on the path?
You know, looking in the rearview mirror to find sort of the red thread, I guess I had a really good sort of elementary school teacher who was all about drama, and we put up plays from early on. So that was on my radar from the beginning. I knew I was good at it. I knew I wasn't as shy as other people on stage when we put up productions. And so when I was an exchange student in high school in Long Island, Cold Spring Harbor High School, and got the lead in Godspell. And I decided to write back to my Danish school, I'm from Denmark originally, that I was going to major in music and math and the creative side of education. And so when I got back to Denmark, I got the lead in the high school play there, finished my education, and then went to Trinity College for acting. And pretty much took it from there.
Just had that acting bug. Just loved it.
Yeah, I mean, in the Danish play in high school, there was a really well-known writer who had created the most successful TV show in Denmark ever. She watched the show because her granddaughter was in my grade and came up to me afterwards and said she thought I should take acting seriously, and organized a private teacher for me. And so before I really knew it, I was already sort of in it without having made that conscious decision. And so one thing just led to another, and I never sort of had the nerve to say stop, or maybe I should do something else, or I was just in it from the beginning.
That's so great, because, not all of us know what we want to do, so it's always nice when you know very young.
Well, it's true. I mean, it's both a curse and a blessing, if you can put it that way, because in certain extents, it's a tough lifestyle for sure. As I'm sure we'll talk about, there are many highs and lows in a career of any creative soul, I suppose, but the blessing part of it is that I did know from early on what I wanted to do. And I think many people in life go through not ever finding that. And so, there are days when you think, damn it, I wish I could just work in the store around the corner and be happy with that. But it just never did it for me.
Well, I'm glad, because we would miss you out there.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So what's your process for getting into character?
Wow. Well, that's it comes from basically reading the script initially. I wanted to get a sense of what the creative soul behind it wants and what they're after, what their point of view is, and then see sort of where my character fits into that. And I have to see if I resonate with that character to start with anyway. And then it's usually a discussion with either the writer or the director or both about sort of where they see the character coming from, and then where I see the character coming from, and then we see where we overlap. And then once I start getting sort of solid answers and I feel I'm developing a solid ground as to where this character is coming from, then you can go into the minutiae of it and really sort of go into each scene and figure out what your sort of overall objectives are. I mean, all very technical stuff on that level. What do you want immediately in that scene? What are your obstacles? And it's all about subtext as far as I'm concerned. So usually the scripts I resonate with is because they're filled with subtext. You don't say what you think. You say something but think something different. So it's very interesting to come up with that sort of second script, the script of subtext. And that's usually where I start really finding my character.
Have you ever, been on set and then you're ready to play your character and the other character is kind of taken in a different direction? Like, has that ever happened? And then how do you handle that?
Yes, that happens frequently. And I think that's the beauty of the craft that I'm in as well, is that I'm not controlling another artistic soul and what their choices may be. So you have to sort of figure out, you have to know who you are as a character well enough to be able to react to whatever they've come up with on their end, right? So in the beginning stages of my career, when I worked on more sort of student films and those kind of things, you would get actors that would try to direct you in a scene and sort of go, listen, if you do this, because that's what they had in mind when they started getting into their character. And it's just a no-no in general. You really don't do that. You really don't direct other actors in a scene. I mean, I'm sure some people still try to, but you really shouldn't. And so it's just a matter of, if you've done your work your homework well enough, then you know who you are. And so you will handle it the way your character would handle it in any given situation. And of course, on TV, it's harder to get away with because usually everybody on the set are pretty clear as to who they are and what they got cast for, and they can't just throw a wrench into the system, and you don't mess around with the words either, or very little. So TV is very, you stick to the guns and stick to what you did at casting, stick to the lines. Where an independent film, of course, there's a little more leeway and you can play around more.
Right. And I guess with TV, especially if you're coming into a series, you have the opportunity to watch it and then see how everybody plays their roles and who are you going to be in with, and then you can kind of go from there. I guess that kind of helps. Does it help, or do you
it's different for everyone. I mean, I know a lot of people don't want to see too much of what's happening before because they want to come in with sort of their creative thing, and if they've been cast in the role, clearly the producers or the director feel like you're bringing something to the table, and so if you then start watching something else, you can, adjust your character. And that was not what they had in mind initially. So it's important to know, of course, who everybody is on the show. If your character knows who they are, if your character don't know who they are, then I would say, for me, it's just do your own thing.
Right.
When I got on the Blacklist, I had a general sense of who everybody was, but I didn't watch the show. And so that helped me in terms of I wasn't intimidated because I didn't know who the stars were apart from James Spader, and so everybody was just another character on the show, and it took a lot of pressure off my shoulders because I was just then focusing on what I needed to do in any given scene.
Well, since you brought up the Blacklist, we'll talk about that. You played Vincent VanDyke for
Yes.
seasons 8 and 9. Did you go in knowing you were going to be in 13 episodes? Or did they
No.
write more? Wow, that
No,
must
I did not. And it was freaky because I don't think I've ever talked about this before, actually, but I was on in season 4 as a different character.
Oh,
Got killed by Spader. And so a lot of the diehard fans were freaking out because apparently the Blacklist very rarely take characters back like that. And
Right.
for some reason, in this case, I got the casting for this Vincent VanDyke character, and I was like, should I tell them I was already on, or should I just go for it? And so I did the casting and thought, whatever, they're going to figure it out or whatever. And then within a few hours, I heard back, and there was a PS from the casting director saying, and we know you were on in season 4. So I was like, okay, at least I don't have to go in sort of lying or pretending
Right.
anything. And so in hindsight, without having that confirmed by anyone, I think they had me in mind. And they were just like, if he looks the same way and feels the same way, that's the guy we want for this character. Because I can't remember I've heard back from a casting so quickly. And so initially I think it was like 3 episodes, but you have to be around the whole season. And that's just general talk on these shows anyway. They want to retain the right to use you if and when they want.
yeah.
And so I was like, sure, I'm around till June, whatever, 3 episodes. And then each time I would come in on set, I would be like, with a makeup person who became my friend, you usually hang out in the makeup trailer a lot. I was like, did you read next week's episode? Am I still alive? They're like, yeah, you're good. I'm like, okay, great. So that was my, information source every single week was like, am I still in it? And then after a while, I was beginning to figure out what they were going to use me for and how this was going to go. So I felt a little more confident in my appearances on the show. I was like, okay, I think I know where this is going, but I didn't talk to anybody about it, of course. And then you start to get to know people. And I think in terms of my character initially, it was such a small character. And I think they had like 5 characters of my size. And I think they were just figuring out themselves, the writers, which of these 5 characters are we going to elevate this way or change this way, or which are we going to get rid of? And it's just a cutthroat business in that sense. So I think the writers sort of, as the season went along, sort of honed in on which characters they responded to or felt could be useful.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because with the Blacklist, as you were saying, they kill him off at the end of the show.
Yeah.
So you must have been like pretty happy going, whoa, I'm not dead yet. I'm not dead yet.
Right, exactly. It's like, yeah, exactly. And it was such a great experience because the people on that show are top professionals, and it was a time during COVID. Very few friends of mine in the industry were working, and
Wow.
Blacklist were one of the few shows that had a really well-developed COVID regulated section, and they had A and B crews, and so if one crew got infected, the other could still work, and so they had all systems in place, and they super carefully tested everybody multiple times, and it was a whole fortress to get into COVID-wise when we were shooting, and so I was just grateful to work with super lovely people. The big names of the show were warm and interested in who I was, and my co-star, who played my boss, is a big Broadway actor and was just a sweetheart and so talented to work with. And so we ended up spending a lot of time together because we were in all the scenes together. Reg Rogers, by the way, in case
yeah,
in case
of
he
course.
listens. So anyway, so it was just a really fun show to be on, and it was a great experience to sort of feel the pressure of a big network show, because it's a very different pressure than doing independent film or doing just a one-day part on a show or something. When you're a regular on that and you have so many people around you and you're in your trailer all day and all of a sudden you're pulled out and produce, now you have to produce what you got hired for, and it's just a lot. It's definitely a focus on intensity and concentration.
Yes. And how was it working with James Spader? I mean, he memorizes the script, right? He memorizes the whole script. He
does. I mean, he is very involved, which is to his credit. Obviously, he's the star of the show. It's his vehicle, so to speak, and everybody understands that. It's like when Spader is on set, there's an extra sort of electricity in the air, and everybody is extra on their toes, and he's very involved. He has opinions about wardrobe, or he might change a line, which nobody else would dare to do, and he might change another actor's line, and it's just, he understands the show so well that's sort of, and I'd rather have someone who was super involved than a big star coming in sort of going, oh, whatever, this is season 7, it's a paycheck for me, here's my lines, and I'm out, which I've seen as well on other shows. And so I found that really inspiring to see an actor take that much interest in every aspect of a show.
What's your system for learning the script? How do you go about it?
It's just dull, and it's just hard work. It's just a lot of repetition. You know, friends and family can help out. I know friends of mine hire people to help them with lines. And so, yeah, it's just really who's around. So initially, it's just yourself doing the work. And then it's the hardest thing, which I think people outside the business may not think about, is learning the lines without making them become rote or stick in a certain pattern. It's learning the lines while still keeping them flexible enough so that you can be flexible on set with whoever you come up against, or if the director tells you something else. You don't want to be locked into having learned it a certain way. And so that's actually the hardest part about learning the lines. It's not actually the lines itself. It's preventing yourself from getting locked into a pattern that you may not end up using. And you see that often with inexperienced actors. When I'm on the other side of the camera as a director casting people come in with an audition, and then you give them an adjustment to see how well they listen. And they think they're making an adjustment, but they're doing it exactly the same way. And this is because they've learned it a certain way, and they're not able to break out of it. And then, of course, you can't cast them because that's not helpful.
Yeah.
So that's the hardest part.
Yeah, and I can see that, with lines, it's the nuances. It's the way you say it, when you pause. And that's an art. I mean, it's one thing to read with somebody else, right? Like if you, had your friend read it, they're not going to maybe know how to read it so that you can pull that energy that you need. But
right, it's true. But it's also, I mean, the pauses and the when you sort of break up a line and so forth, you need to know what's important with the subtext and what's important in any given piece for sure. But it's also, at the end of the day, you're operating from inside out. I know a lot of people think that actors work in front of mirrors and they're very aware where they look. And of course, on the surface of it, it's important how we look. We're on screen after all. But if you attack a character from outside in, that's when you can get in trouble. So it's not so much about, I'm going to pause here because that may work well or that may look good. It has to come from inside out. So that break almost happens automatically if you've worked on the script enough to know what your character is, and he gets distracted because you remember something else during that sentence. That's why the break happens, not because you decide, oh, here's a break, and that'll feel good or that'll look good. It's all from inside out.
I love that. I didn't think about it that way. So do you do backstories on your character, or do you just, okay, and then how do you approach that? Do you write?
Honestly, it depends on how big the project is in terms of how much work I'm going to put into it. Because if it's a small character in a big film and my line is, would you like milk in your coffee, sir? And that's my line. It may be with Tom Cruise or whatever. So it's a big scene in one way, but it's a terribly small scene in another. No, I'm not going to do a backstory. I'm not going to waste my time on that. However, if it's a character that really demands a lot, absolutely I would. And it's really, when I get scripts and I can tell the writing isn't quite there, it's usually because the writer hasn't done that work. If I play a husband and a wife and I can tell on the page, clearly these people don't know each other because they say things you would have covered 20 years ago. If they've been married 20 years, they wouldn't have this conversation now. It makes no sense.
Right.
And so with that in mind, I go through everything that way. And so backstory becomes important if I feel that there's an effect from the backstory that I can use in my current portrayal of the character, then a backstory is helpful. But I know actors who get so bogged down in their backstory that doesn't really bring anything to the table other than their head is spinning in any given scene, right? So backstory is helpful in so much it'll give you confidence that you've done all the work and that you know your character well. But at the end of the day, when you get into a scene, you've got to be present there. And if you come in loaded with when you went to school and that your mother didn't like you and you try to get that into that thing, I mean, nobody does that in real life, right? You're affected by your childhood. You're affected by the conditions. But when you're in a certain situation, you are who you are then. And so everything else has brought you to that point. And so hopefully you can find that without having to go through all of that every single time you enter a scene.
That's so true. How do you prepare for an audition? I mean, how does that work? Like, you probably have an agent or a manager that sends you. So what's your preparation to going in?
It's similar and different. It's similar in that I go through the text and I figure out like what responds to me if I have questions about a character. If something pops up that doesn't make sense to me, I have to go back and figure out how I can make sense of that. Because in this case, I don't have the luxury of sitting down with the writer or the director and go, why is this happening this way or whatever. And so I have to sort of find my way through it and make my own choices. And then I think, in general, it's a balance between figuring out how much time. I mean, this is like super inside knowledge, and I'm not sure it's interesting to anybody but me. But what took me a long time was figuring out how much work to put into any given audition, because you don't want to be the dumbass that. Sorry if I can.
No,
say
yeah,
that word
totally.
Okay. I don't want to be the dumbass spending 4 days on a casting that I never hear back from, because that's most of the time that's your life as an actor. You put in a casting and you never hear anything and you're like, I guess I didn't get it, right? So if you spend 4 days on that, you're going to feel like a dumbass. If you spend 2 minutes on it because you're never going to hear back and you're like, oh, I'm never going to hear back anyway, you're going to do a terrible job and not do justice to your profession either. So it's finding that balance of putting in enough work so you feel you've worked on it enough to give a fair portrayal of what you were able to do. And then if you get that call back, then you can put in that extra 2 or 3 days that you might not have spent on the first go around. That's just for me personally. I think everybody has different versions of that. So again, depending on the size of the role and the commitment of what that project may be, I would make an assessment. Sometimes you get outrageous castings with like 9 pages of stuff. And either that means it's a massive TV show and it's a big role, that's happened, or it's super inexperienced young filmmaker who doesn't know how to send stuff out to actors and it's dumb, right? So you find the balance of how much time you're going to do with that and what you're going to spend time doing. And so that's a case-per-case basis, but in general, I just try to figure out what my choice for the character would be and take my spin on it. That's crucial, I think, for actors in general. It's a mistake I see many actors do all the time when they start out, is they try to give a generic audition because they feel like, well, on the day I can do whatever you want because I'm that good. I can be this way or this way or this way. But I think your best shot as an actor is to come in with your spin on it this is Lukas Hassel's version of this character. And if they love it, you're in. And if it's not what they wanted, you're out. But at least you're not playing it safe and be in this box with hundreds of other actors auditioning for the same thing. You got to come in with what you think, this is what I would do with this character. I think that's your best shot.
And then how do you handle not getting the role? And I just wanted to talk about, like, some people can perceive it as rejection, right? And I was just kind of curious what your thoughts are about being an actor, having to put yourself out there time and time and time again, and sometimes not, and getting disappointed. Maybe you wanted a role and you didn't get it. Like, how do you go into not getting the role, and then what are your perceptions of, like, rejection? Do you feel like you're rejected, or?
Yeah, it's very difficult to, it's a difficult thing, and it's hard not to think of it as rejection. And I think, in my now rather mature life, I've gone through the gamut of feeling rejected and feeling like, what am I doing with my life, to a much more sort of philosophical approach as to what this is about. And what helped me a lot was when I started casting my own films, I could see from the other side that it's not really, a lot of the times, it's not that people are doing it wrong. It's just that, like, it's a matter of the tone that you're looking for, or you might already have somebody in mind for another character that would not go with that casting. So the casting could have been great, but it just wasn't exactly what I had in mind. And you're spoiled for choices in a city like New York. You have so many talented people. So when I started realizing it's not because you suck, it's just because somebody else had a vision that fit better. So that was eye-opening. I would go back from auditions and going, well, listen, I felt I did a good job there, and that's the best I can do. The rest is out of my control. If I feel I put in the work and I did what I set out to do, then I forget about the casting as soon as it's over. It's out of my head. And if I hear back, I have to go back sometimes and find it and go, what was that for? What is this callback for? And I could find it in my email or whatever. I could, oh, that's the project. Great. Oh, cool. I'm excited about that one. And that's just a lifelong lesson, because it does feel awful to be excited about something and thinking you're right for it and then not getting it. I mean, often castings, I would do something that I knew I wasn't right for. So I'd be like, this is really just for the casting director to get to know me a little bit better. It's not for this project, because I've never booked that. But if I do a good enough job, the casting director may remember me for something else. So it's about looking at it as an opportunity to get seen by people who may not have seen you before, and not get discouraged that you didn't get that particular part, or reading for a role that you're not going to get, because I would never cast myself in that or whatever.
Right.
Just go in and then do your spin, then have fun with it and do what you would do. And then, all you can do in this world is do your best. And part of why we may talk about that later, but part of why I got into writing and directing was, as an actor, you give your power away to everybody else constantly. And that's just the life of an actor. And if you're not comfortable with that, then get into writing and directing as well, or get out of the business, because you really have very little control about whether you get a role or not. You put in your best effort, and that's it.
Yeah, I was thinking, I had a guest, a talent manager on, and he was just talking about sometimes you have to pivot. Mm-hmm. So you'll probably also have to figure out how to pivot. Like, sometimes if acting isn't it, like what you said, like maybe you're just not getting the roles, well, then go into directing. And maybe cast yourself.
I know, but it is tough. It's tough. You sometimes I see people that I'm thinking, ooh, I hope their heart is open to other avenues, because I don't see it, right? But then 4 years later, you see them in something and you're like, oh my God, they're really good. And so they stuck to it and they figured out what they weren't good at and worked on it and got better. And so it's very difficult to shoot down anybody's dreams and say, listen, you really should pivot because you suck at what you do, right? That's tough. But as in anything, you see people sort of wasting their life in certain ways because they're not getting the breaks that they think they deserve. And so they end up pretty much being a waiter all their lives instead of getting that break. And then in hindsight, is that valuable? And maybe it is, So it's hard to judge for anybody else. Everybody's responsible for their own lives and for their own choices. And for those people who didn't make it, maybe they were happy they tried.
Yeah.
And success is not always about getting that role or getting that big paycheck. Success could be just giving it a shot.
Right. Yeah. And I guess it's like feedback too. I think that it must be really hard when you're acting and you're not getting the feedback. And I also get that you could get feedback that's wrong feedback, like, you should give this up. And maybe they just haven't found their role yet, and maybe it's a deep dive into kind of discovering who they can play. I know that there's like typecast, but maybe it's just more the role that they're meant to play. It's kind of like Sylvester Stallone was meant to play Rocky Balboa. I can't see anybody else as that,
Sure. I mean, or there will be a different Rocky, and you would never have known about Rocky Balboa's version.
Guess you're right.
You know what I mean?
You're
It'll
right.
be like so. It's hard to say, but it's for me the hardest thing or the best example of what you're talking about there is I think sometimes out in LA I see a lot of beautiful people in acting that cannot act.
Right. Yes.
And I think it's they've been told since they were 5, oh my God, you're so beautiful, you should be an actor. And then they start listening to it. Or they're a teen and they're a model and they're like, oh my God, you're so gorgeous, you're handsome, you should be an actor. And they start listening to that. And just because you're pretty on screen or handsome, whatever, that doesn't make you a good actor. And so people, I think particularly in LA, I see a lot of souls like that. And I feel bad for them because they don't know how to get out of that. This is what they've been told their entire life, that beauty will get you this and this and this. And people tell you stuff all the time without thinking it through. It's just a thing they say. Oh, you're so handsome, you should be an actor. And then they walk away and never think about it again. Meanwhile, that person is stuck with that thought, like, should I be an actor? I guess maybe I should, right? And if enough people tell them that, then they ended up pursuing something they really maybe had no interest in to begin with.
Yeah.
Acting is such a tough business that if you go into that business thinking it's a good profession, you're going to make tons of money for fame, boy, are you in for a lot of hurt. Yeah, I think if you go into it because you're looking to discover who you are and you want to work with creative souls, and you're not expecting to get that paycheck and that house and the big car and all that stuff. If you go into that with that mindset, you're much better off. And then if it happens, great. But if it doesn't, then at least you know why you did it and you can still enjoy the smaller projects.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just on your note about the LA and pretty, it's just sad that a lot of actors, because they're attractive, get rewarded and get roles that others that are very talented but may not have the pristine look.
Sure.
It's just sad because I see a lot of bad stuff out there.
Right, but this is the sad realization of this business that I've come to. Whether I call it sad, but it's just reality is that it is a business. Yeah. It is a business, and unfortunately, if audiences are responding to good looks, that's why you have endless Christmas movies with incredibly beautiful people, because that's what people respond to, and so producers are hesitant to break out of that mold because they're risking money, they're risking studios' money. And so they go with what's safe, what is proven to work most of the time. And so it's very difficult for others to break into that mold. I mean, it's just beauty is heralded in this society. And so that's the same in this business. And, you have the more you get into the business, the more you realize, when you start out, you think, oh, I could be picked out from nobody and I could be I could be the lead in this next big movie. And now you realize this is never going to happen because they're going to look at your Instagram followers, your Twitter followers, your numbers. They have a whole formula to figure out whether you're box office, this and that and the other. And so, unless it's that particular project where the gimmick is that they're going to find a completely unknown and make him so-and-so, you're never going to be cast as the lead in a big feature if you're not already successful. It's just not going to happen.
Wow.
Because it's a ladder. You got to build yourself up to that level, and so you're just not. That's not your lot. So it's an interesting thing figuring out how movies sell once you get into the other aspects of filmmaking, like why the business is as it is. It is to make money. It's not to make the world better necessarily.
Right. Yeah. Well, that gets me to the challenges of an actor. And I was just curious, like, as we're talking about beauty and stuff, and I was just thinking, I know that women have it a little harder, I think, in this way, and maybe you can tell me the flip side.
Sure.
But, women have to be pretty and young. And so then they'll go into plastic surgery and do stuff like that. And then also, or Botox. And then there's weight too. They got to be thin. So I was just curious, like, do men have those pressures as an actor? Do you have to feel like you got to be fit and young looking, or what do you feel are the challenges?
Well, so there are many different ways of thinking about this, but I think, in general, it's important for actors to sort of have a sense of who they are, right? So if you want to be the male or the female lead in a big time movie, right? Historically, those people are attractive and fit, and and the men's side, they're all muscles, and it's gotten bigger and bigger over the years, and for women, I should say, skinny and pretty. And so if you don't fit into that, it's going to be tough for you as an actor to break out of that mold and become a massive big lead in something that may not be comedy, right? Because it just seems heavier people are funnier, or they're in comedies more for some stupid reason.
Right.
And so there are certain molds, again, going back to statistics and what's proven to work. I think you're right when you say women have it tougher, because, you see sometimes ludicrous casting where two actors are more or less the same age. She's playing the mother and he's playing the son, which is just dumb. But again, that's sort of what society are used to seeing. They want women to look a certain way, they want men to look a certain way. So in my case, because I look a certain way, I would be considered sort of leading man material. And that puts a different pressure on what I do with my body and so forth. If I was obese or whatever and different looking, whatever, I would be a character actor, and I would not have to worry so much about going to the gym all the time. So depending on who you are as a person and what you're going for, that'll adjust your motivations for fitness and whatever. You see, I don't know him personally. I worked with him once, Jonah Hill, for instance. He was rather heavy at one point, and then comedic actor, and then he lost the weight, and now he's more in drama, and he can do anything. I think he's incredibly talented, and he's very hurt by everybody bringing up weight issues and talking about his past as well, and he feels it's not important, but he's always locked back into that. People love to discuss those kind of things, and it's hurtful, because to him, he's an actor. That's all he is. He's a talented actor. Forget about what my body looked this way or this way. This is what, I'm interested in. I think something I've realized just from personal experience as a male actor is more about the age aspect of it. That I was pretty busy in my 20s. I did a lot of theater there. And then in my 30s, it's kind of got stuck. I was in a dearth of sorts. There was just nothing there. And then when I hit 40, I got busy again. And I've always thought, what is that about? And I finally figured out that I think it's men in their 30s are too old to be that young, hot thing out of college and that budding, fiance and whatever. But I was too young to be that man with gravitas. And so when I got into my 40s, all of a sudden I could be the dad, I could be the villain, I could be all kinds of things that I just couldn't own when I was 30. So for men, they have a renaissance where Hollywood for women is just tough after 40. It's just a tough business. And so, that's on Hollywood. I don't agree with it. I love when I see women being their ages and look the way they should look.
Right, yeah.
But again, I'm also a fan of doing whatever they want. So if Botox is their thing, if plastic surgery is their thing, to each their own.
Right,
I certainly don't judge that. But it's tough if people are forced into doing that kind of thing in order to feel competitive. That's my take on that.
Yeah. Because, I love age appropriateness,
I
like
agree.
just in couples, but, you see a lot of like 60-year-old men married to these 30-year-old or even 20-year-olds and have children. So It's just too bad that women can't be in that too, because today's age is totally changing. It's not, we think of the 50s as golden girls, but that's not today's 50 anymore, or 60.
That's true.
So
that's true.
I wish the times would change with that as well. And maybe it will. I'll
maybe
be
it will. Exactly. Let's go for that.
Yeah. So let's look into you being a writer-director. And you did, you've done several short films, but two in particular that I watched, Into the Dark and The Son, the Father. And both, I mean, I got to tell you, I did not see those ends coming of those.
Good.
Yeah. So, I mean, well done.
Thank you.
Could you talk to me about, let's talk about Into the Dark. Like, what made you think, if you want to just say a little bit about what the movie's about, and then how did you come up with that idea?
So Into the Dark is a sort of a sci-fi short, 13 minutes. It's two men strapped in back to back in a capsule heading from moon to Earth. And then you sort of figure out what the story is from there. And, as I mentioned earlier, as an actor, you give your power away to everybody else. So once I found myself on set thinking, I would have written this differently, or I wonder why the camera is not over there, and how come they're pushing in here? I started thinking, well, maybe I'm having thoughts of my own here that I could create something myself. And so writing was that first step in taking some power back. And then realizing that in order to have real power, you need to direct what you write, right? You don't want to just give your script away to somebody else. So that was the creative journey from actor to writer to director. And Into the Dark was really then my first sort of really ambitious attempt. I'd made a small short film before just to get a sense of it. That I still think is really cute. This little 6-minute short called Dinner with Peter.
I love that one too. That was good. I saw it on your YouTube channel. I was like,
you did?
Oh my God, that is so funny. I mean,
good. It was just a little gimmick of like a 6-minute short that I just wanted to try out what it was like. I shot it in my own apartment and just, had my good friend and DP Henry B. Lee shoot it. And so I was like, okay, I can do this. I really enjoyed doing that. Technically, it was all over the map and sound was terrible and blah, 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 but it was cute. And so Into the Dark was like a much more ambitious project. And I did it again with my friend Henry B. Lee, without whom I really couldn't have done it, because he's such a great technician and artist in many ways that he could solder, the lights into the capsule, and he could do all the stuff that I couldn't do. But then, I built this capsule pod in my apartment, upended my apartment for 10 days on my 5th floor walk up. So he and I would traipse around the city and buy vinyl rubber lining for the inside of the capsule and plywood boards, and figure out my downstairs neighbor has a saw. We could use her automatic saw. And we were like, so we're putting this whole thing together almost as a home project. And I knew the script worked well. And it just came out of this idea of sort of be careful sort of what you wish for, or sort of don't judge a book by its cover was sort of my sense of it. I wanted to explore notions of life and death and expectations from it, and I wanted to play with people's expectations. As an audience member, I always feel it's important that I can lean into a project. When a film doesn't work for me, is usually when I lean back and I go, "Oh, that's beautiful," or "Look at those special effects." But I'm just letting it sort of. There's nothing new or unexpected. When I see something that's like, "Ooh, how come they're using the dialogue this way?" or "That's an interesting choice," I lean forward. And so I always wanted to make people lean forward in whatever I write or whatever I direct, to sort of not quite know, to have to put things together themselves, and then maybe throw in a curveball. So, the main guy in Into the Dark basically goes through sort of the 5 stages of grief, with denial and acceptance and anger and so forth. And I wanted to give each segment in there its own little beat, and then up to that sort of hopefully surprising conclusion. And it's just, sci-fi lends itself to creating rules and creating worlds that don't exist now, to suit your thematic, whatever you're trying to explore. And so Into the Dark sort of came out of that.
How was it shooting, yourself in this capsule? That must have been very claustrophobic. Did you have to take breaks, or?
Well, so it's movie magic, number one. We basically had a base where we could shoot directly above.
Oh, okay.
And then we built a sarcophagus so you could shoot from either end. That was open at either end. And then we built half sarcophagus so you could shoot down the length of it. So I was never sort of fully enclosed per se in that sense. What was tough was I had to be strapped in every single time. And having my arms straight for that length of time, turns out that that's not good anatomically. So I had sore arms for a year after that.
Oh, no.
For a year after shooting that, because I'd be strapped in there for hours. And I would direct my DP strapped into the box. I would be like, well, let's move the camera over there. Sort of with my head, I would nod it over there. We would sort of do things that way because it would take so long to get strapped in with the exact orange bands that we were using that it was just easier to stay strapped in. But so it wasn't claustrophobic really, and it was really a luxury of having built the set in my own apartment. We could take as much time as we needed because that's usually the thing that can hinder you. I mean, if you don't have a lot of money and you want to shoot something fast, well, then you're in trouble. It's not going to be very good. It's that sort of, there's a famous triangle, like you can't have money and it can't be good and it can't be fast at the same time. You have to pick two of the three.
Yeah.
And so that what we had was a lot of time. So we had a ton of footage. And so when I edited it, I just had so much to choose from. And there's the VFX effects, which is why people don't do sci-fi very much in short films, is that that's expensive.
Yeah.
But I had some friends who used the sequences I needed to hire people for their company. They were like, well, what can you do with this concept? And they would put something together, and that's what I got. So from sort of some of these young interns, they would put stuff together, and they were really good at it. So I ended up being able to use much of it. The only thing I had to throw real money at was the establishing shot in space. They just couldn't do that well. And so in the end, somebody knew the designer from Beasts of the Southern Wild, I think it was called.
Oh, wow.
An NYU graduate. And he gave me a good rate, but he did charge me money for it. But without it, I didn't have a movie. I was waiting for that shot for a year.
Wow.
To finish my film. But that gave me time to finesse it the way I wanted. And I edited it myself. I corrected it myself. And it was all part of that gratifying feel of taking charge.
Yeah.
Which, as an actor, I hadn't really been able to for so long.
So what did you edit it in?
Final Cut 7.
Oh, wow.
I loved it back then. It was such a good product.
Good.
And when they went to Final Cut 10, I was like, damn it, now I don't get it again. I have to relearn it.
Yeah.
So I went to Adobe Premiere. I said, that's your lesson, Final Cut. But so it was just like, and back in the day when I was doing Into the Dark, Apple had just introduced this notion that if you bought a laptop from them, you could qualify for one-on-one sessions.
Oh, wow.
And so back then you could book a one-on-one session as many times as you wanted. And so whenever I had a problem with editing or an effect I couldn't figure out, I would book a one-on-one. And I would get an expert from Apple to sit with me for an hour and help me figure it out. And they loved that it wasn't like me wanting to know about email. They were like, oh, you have a film project? Yeah, I'll help you, because they were all film students probably, whatever. So grateful. I gave Apple employees a shout out in the credits, I think, as well.
Oh,
I was
that's
very
great.
grateful for that. And then that film did incredibly well. It was such a great start to my sort of writer, director, actor process. It was so much fun to go out with that. And because I hadn't really gone out to film festivals before I knew very little about the festival circuit. But then when this film kept getting in, and I decided to travel out with it. So I met a ton of people all across the US and Europe as well. And it really, I can backtrack a lot of the stuff that's happening to me now from Into the Dark.
Yeah.
It really brought a lot of work, and it brought a lot of attention to my person that I just didn't have before.
Yeah, networking is so important, and it doesn't have to be the way you think it is. I think as you get older, you kind of mature into not being so afraid to talk to people. I think when you're younger, sometimes maybe it's more daunting, like, oh my God, to talk to somebody. But
sure.
I just think you just never know when you meet somebody how that's going to, like, I met you on a film shoot.
Yep.
I think it was last year. And
last year, yep.
And now here you are on my podcast. So
I know.
It's just like,
exactly.
You never know.
You never know. And that's why, I know people who sometimes they spend a lot of time and money making a short film, and they apply to 3 festivals and they don't get in or whatever. And it's like, that was it. And I'm like, wait a second, you really gotta follow up. Like so much of this game is post your film. It's not just the film. There's like all this game afterwards that you need to explore it. And of course, if your film doesn't get into any festivals after 25 applications, well, maybe your film isn't as good as you thought. But if it gets in, just keep going. And then it's important for you, depending on, again, what your motivations are, to go out with that film so people can meet you, see your work, and then meet you in person. That's when the real networking happens. And so, again, it depends on what people are out to do. I know filmmakers who just enjoy the process and they made 30 short films, all the same level of sort of professionalism, whatever, or lack thereof. It's the same level. And that's what they enjoy. And they go out to festivals and they hang, and it becomes like a hobby of sorts, where if you're trying to improve your game and make something happen, well, then make your next project a little bit better than the project before, and really go out and then network and meet other creative souls that you gel with.
Yeah, I love it. And then you had another film, The Son, the Father, and that did very well as...
that was a whole different adventure. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, that spun differently too. So you really like those twist endings.
I do.
So tell me about that one.
Yeah, The Son, the Father was, that came out of this notion that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I see that. I see that in the U.S. currently a lot. I think people don't necessarily mean to be malignant, but because of the actions, they end up being in a terrible situation. And I think, I think people don't always mean poorly, but because of choices they make, they end up messing it up for many, many other people. And so I'm living through that in the U.S. right now, I feel. So I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt in this case, that I think they mean well, but they just take terrible choices, or they're manipulated by people smarter than them. So the idea of the road to hell is being paved with good intentions came to me with The Son, the Father. I wrote this script, and it's basically about a young boy, and the events on his 11th birthday leads to dark and twisted consequences sort of far into his future, because there's a big time jump in the film. And that script I sent in to a couple of short film festivals. Holly Shorts Film Festival is one of the bigger short film festivals in the U.S. It's out in L.A., and they happened to have a script writing track to that festival. And so I submitted it to there and never thought about it again until I saw a posting on Facebook somewhere in some film community saying, "Oh, well, I'm really sorry my script didn't win, but good luck to Lukas Hassel." And I was like, wait, what? And so I went in and looked, and they hadn't even told me from Holly Shorts that I was the winner. But so it turns out my script won. Wow. And the little known, I hadn't even looked into what it was winning. I assumed it was a $100 check or a subscription to Inktip or one of those online script sites. It turned out the winning script got some kind of production deal with a production company in Seattle. And I was like, okay, I wonder what that means. I never heard anything. So 3 months later, I followed up. I was like, what's happening? And they're like, no, we're working on it. This production company in Seattle, they're going to reach out to you and whatever. And sure enough, I got a phone call from a lovely guy, Ben Andrews, up in Seattle. It was like, yeah, we loved your script. We picked your script together with Holly Shorts, and we're looking to make it. What's a good window for you? And I'm like, wait, what? Okay. So we figured it out, and then they had a whole team that did the casting. I joined the casting via Skype back then from New York. Found some great actors in Seattle. They put together the locations. We would send pictures back and forth and put together an amazing crew. So I flew in 4 days before shooting, not knowing anyone, and everything was in place, and we shot for 3 days. And it was an incredible experience, and that film did really well. And of course, based on now the connections I'd made through Into the Dark, I had festival programmers that were looking for my next film, and so it became easier the second time around. I didn't have to get somebody's attention for a blind submission. Now they're already, I could send them an email saying, I just submitted my new film, whatever. It doesn't mean it gets in, but it means at least they'll have a look for it or remember it a little bit more. So Into the Dark did equally, if not better than, The Son and the Father did equally, if not better than Into the Dark, and had a blast going around with that. Again, and trying out different festivals I hadn't been to before, and then going back to ones I had been before. And so it was just a really great experience. And that's when I was like, okay, I think I'm ready for a feature next. So I feel like it would be diminished returns to a certain extent to keep going down the short film circuit. And to challenge myself, a feature really would be next. And I felt I was more or less ready for that. So, to each their own, but that was sort of my situation with it. And so, so that was what I took away from that.
Well, and also I'm glad that you did your feature because, I think some people just stick, like you said, like in the short films, they just do one after the other because they're easier. Probably you can get them produced and it doesn't cost as much money as a daunting feature can feel.
Right.
So why don't you tell us about The House of Abraham? So you wrote this feature. It's been it's been filmed, right? So
Correct.
Where are we at? What's it about? I can't wait.
Well,
When's it going out?
So just real quick about the whole thing about the shorts is that the difference from shorts to features is, yes, it's a ton more different to make. It's more difficult to make a feature. It takes more money. It takes, one thing is with a short, you can ask people to do you a favor and sort of work 3 days, over a long weekend. And a feature is 21 days, whatever. That's a chunk of life. You can't expect people to do that for next to nothing. And so that's a real commitment. But the beauty of shorts, and that's why I don't want to diss shorts in any shape or form, and you weren't doing it either, I'm just saying to be clear, shorts are amazing. I think it's an incredible resource and a great way of figuring out what your craft is, what your point of view is, what your skill set is, and it's really the only chance you're going to get to be without compromise, because you're not going to make your money back, most likely. Now there is a little more money to be had. There are a few more outlets for short films, but you're not going to make your money back. So there's no one to... You're not beholden to anyone in that sense. So there are no compromises. So it's your one chance to really get your vision through. And that was what was great about The Son, the Father, and Into the Dark, was I did what I thought had to be done. Whereas when you start doing a feature, there are compromises that has to happen. There are going to be producers with input. There's going to be executive producers that are like, well, if it's this money, then we need this talent attached, right? So the process with House of Abraham was, I have other scripts that are perhaps more artistic and has more to say about the world and is out to change the world, and that I feel may be stronger on that level. But House of Abraham is probably the most commercial script I've written. It came about because I did a short film with a wonderful actor and director, Lisa Belcher, in Austin, Texas. We did a film together called Guest of Honor. And we just got on really well, and we had the same sort of sensibilities. And she was like, I have a little bit of money. Maybe we should do a feature that we talked about. I'm like, that's exactly what I want to do. But I don't want to do a feature with, endless shots of trees in the wind. I've seen lots of those features because that's cheap, And the thing about features is it's, shots of trees in the wind. That's easy to shoot, and it doesn't cost money. So I was determined not to do that. So if I was going to do one, it was going to be something I hadn't quite seen before. And then with one location, few actors to keep the budget down, of course. And dialogue is cheap, so I knew it had to be pretty dialogue-driven. And then out of nowhere, Lisa, as a producer, raised real money all of a sudden. So this small project that was meant to be sort of her and I acting in it, we were going to co-direct it, became like a real project all of a sudden. And suddenly the money was such a size that we were like, now we're a little uncomfortable not having bigger name in it for the female lead, and for example. And so I had already worked with Natasha Henstridge before. She's a good friend of mine, and she's incredibly talented. Happened to know that she had just come back from a project in London and saw that she was talking about just chilling out in April. And I was like, So literally a week before shooting, we were all getting a little nervous about not having sort of a star or female lead in it somehow. And so I just reached out to Natasha and I said, listen, I know you hate reading scripts, but I have a script. Would you mind reading it and see if you're remotely interested? And I haven't reached out to you before because I don't want to put you under pressure because you know me that you should do it, whatever. It's not like that at all. And she read it, and I got a message at 3 a.m. in the morning on my text that she hadn't been able to put it down. She loved it. What's the deal? So I spoke to her the next morning, and it came about in 6 days. It came about. And ended up being an Austin shooting. I'd already spoken to Lynn Shay, who's an incredible actress as well. I'd worked with her too, and she loved the script, and she's just incredible. I'm so in awe of Lynn Shay as well. And so she came out, and so we just had this little wonderful team put together. And then because now Lisa wasn't going to play the female lead, I pulled back from co-directing and let Lisa direct by herself. And that was a win-win for everyone. And so we shot in Austin, Texas over 3.5 week period. Crazy, great team. We really lucked out that the TV show Walker on CW was on hiatus. So everybody on that crew were looking for work. and came to work on our film for, less than the usual TV rate. And so we just lucked out with a really great crew. And I think the film looks all the better for it. And so we're in post on it now. We've shared a trailer with some investors, and everybody seems super happy. And we're knee deep in post. We are close to having some kind of picture lock. And then we can get into sound design and color correction and music and stuff. So we're at a really exciting spot, and I think it's a really cool film. It's something we haven't seen before for sure.
Oh, that's great. What are you editing it on?
I think our editor. So this one I'm not editing. I'm just giving feedback. We have an editor, and I think he works on Avid.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm always curious what system people work on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Avid, but we're using Frame.io so that I can tap into it from here and give comments and see what's happening. So because they're in Austin and I'm in New York, so we have sort of editing sessions when we just watch the movie together now and sort of stop and start and go, how about this? We can try this here and da da da. So that's the process of that right now, and it's a psychological thriller / sort of horror light about sort of a woman arriving to the house of Abraham with the intent to end her life. And then it turns out that weekend, her agenda is different, and it changes that particular weekend.
Wow. I love those.
So, it's pretty.
It's
a slow burn for sure, and it's not what you think, and it goes different places for sure. So everybody on the crew were super excited. They loved the script, and they were like, it's not often we don't get to work on projects where we love the material. It's just a job. This one we're super excited about. So it's very sweet, whether they meant it or not, but that was what I heard.
Well, so how long did it take you to write it? And how did you come up with the idea?
So actually it's the fastest script I've written, to be honest, because it was just meant to be this little nothing project for myself and Lisa. And so I was like, okay, if it's just a little nothing for $40,000, I'm not going to spend a year on it, which some of my other scripts have taken a year easily in rewrites and so forth. So I pitched her 2 ideas. One she wasn't so keen on, and the other one she's like, ooh, that's interesting. And so I put together the outline pretty quickly. And the outline is the hardest as a writer, I think. You have to sort of know your beginning, middle, and end. I should just sit down with bare bones. But if you get that right, then putting the meat on is, for me, super easy. Then it's just figuring out how to create complex characters and what they want and what they're after and how it fits in with that outline that you've already created. So, yeah, I think I wrote that in like 5 weeks or something, like super fast. And then, of course, I've adjusted it throughout once it got into the hands of others. And I have trusted readers that I really trust with a first draft. And then I have other readers that I trust with a 6th draft. And then when the draft is what I think pretty ready, I go to the highest tier for that feedback. And then, we settle on it there. So again, that's a part of networking, is building up that network of great writers and writers that are able to give different feedbacks at different levels. And that's been incredibly helpful. So, so House of Abraham, just, it's hard to imagine that it actually came to be, because it's, it's you hear about a lot of people looking to make the feature or whatever, and it's just tough to make it happen. But to Lisa Belcher's credit, she made it happen. If it wasn't for her, I mean, granted, it's my script and so forth, but if it wasn't for her, this project would not have happened.
Oh, wow. Well, It takes a team. I mean,
it does. Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. And I was just kind of curious about, did you project kind of where is it going to go in distribution, or are you now working on that?
Well, that's part of the thing. I mean, I was always adamant before we even made it that we should reach out to distribution companies and have a chat with them before we even made it. Because again, as I talked about earlier about short films, a lot of people don't think about the end game, right? And so I see a lot of people make these features and they're floundering. They can show it in a few festivals, but it goes nowhere. And most of them, are not great, in fairness. But then every now and then I'd be out at a festival and I would see a great feature and it would go nowhere because they just hadn't figured out the end game in advance. And so they're schlepping this project around that they can't get people to see, and it just stalls. So I was adamant that we at least had some meetings with people that were interested in the log line, interested in the synopsis maybe, and shared some visual boards with them and got some feedback early. And then, so now that the movie shot, they're already aware of the project. And so now they're responding to the trailer. And we just had our first distribution offer. And so before it's even fully finished, which is awesome. Some really big festivals has reached out to us for like secret invites to send in a rough cut. They're happy to see rough cut, which doesn't mean we get in, but at least they're reaching out to us because the word is out. You know, it was out in Variety that this film was happening, and so that's like a whole different level of the profession that I am new to, and that Lisa is also new to, but she's a bulldog when it comes to these things. She really wants to understand and is eager to learn and loves that process as well. So she is becoming an expert in dealing with distribution companies and sales agents and figuring out which is which and what we might need for this project. And so she's quickly becoming sort of experienced in that. And sort of I'm just learning from her because that's totally not my forte. I know my strengths and I know my weaknesses, and all that is definitely a weakness of mine. So I'm happy that I'm paired up with a really talented producer/director who can help forward the project. So I have no doubt it's going to end up in a good place based on the word of mouth on the film and based on her efforts.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you come onto a project and all the opportunities that you don't see ahead of time. Like for you were writing this film and thinking, well, how do I get it, made? And then you connect with Lisa, and then there's that. And then through this film, she's raised up to be a really great producer and doing all that work. So if she didn't have that, she may not have, this was the avenue for her.
That's exactly right. And she's a great director as well. And it's but I think often the greatest directors are also ones who are great producers, because you have to understand all aspects of that to really take charge as a director. And so in my case, I didn't get that experience of directing a feature, which was my original goal, which was my whole purpose of writing that script, actually. But in the end, I stepped away from that for the sake of the whole project. So I am still looking for that first directorial feature debut, and I'm just looking at some of my other scripts that are potentially the easiest ones to get started, and I'm definitely hungry for that now. And we'll just see how The House of Abraham does, if that's going to help open a few doors in terms of getting some people interested in fundraising for my feature.
Right. So I'm just always kind of curious with people that are doing multiple things. What's like a day in the life of you? Like, do you write every day? I know you run. I
do.
How do you fill up your day when you're not working? Are you writing all day long, thinking up ideas? What are you doing?
So in my case, I guess it's different to each. My brain is always churning on something. And it could be an idea, it could be something that makes me angry, and I'm trying to figure out how can I get that into a story that is entertaining for other people to watch. Because for me, I think it's all about point of view. It's important as a writer, as an artist, to have opinions about everything. It doesn't mean that you should be judgmental, but it means that you should have an opinion about everything. And I think, so the things that happen around me inspire me, and that might change an idea that I had. So even if I'm not sitting on the laptop writing actual words, even as I'm running or whatever, my mind is always churning on something. So I never feel that artistically I'm not working, which can both be fantastic but also exhausting at the same time.
Yes.
It's very hard to let that go on a vacation. I'm still going, I really feel like I need to write this down, or thinking at the beach, I'm sort of not present in the moment because I'm already thinking about other things. So it's an exercise to be present in the moment as a human being. But as an artist, I'm definitely always working on something. It could be a rewrite on an older script. A few years ago, the very first script I wrote was the only comedy I've written, called Girls on the Run, about 3 women in their 80s that escape their nursing home to seek out the birthplace of Rudolph Valentino. And it becomes this road trip for women in their 80s. And always loved that story, but I wrote it before I had the skills to make a good script. So I plotted around it, it was terrible, left it behind, and then 2 years ago I was like, that script was always a problem, but I loved the story, so I rewrote it with what I knew now and submitted it to Screencraft, which is one of the bigger competitions out there, and won me the fellowship.
All right.
So it was really weird to have this old script come full circle, but it's all about constantly improving your skill set and then trying to And then you can go back and take scripts that didn't work and do them with what you know now. And then, of course, it was odd because that brought me a ton of meetings as a comedy writer, which is really not what I want to do or do anymore. All my work, as you can see with Into the Dark and Son of the Father, is pretty dark material. House of Abraham is super dark. And so dark is definitely sort of my field of gravity. So it was very strange being out with girls on the run, you know. But anyway, who knows? That may still well get made because it's very makeable. But so always working on something, always trying to figure out how I can make a project happen. And so, as I mentioned before, right now it's figuring out which of my scripts I want to make my directorial debut with, and which ones make sense financially, which ones can I actually get made. And of course, you know, drama, everything I write is drama.
Right,
sometimes gussied up in sci-fi, sometimes gussied up in horror, but it's drama at its core. But drama by itself just doesn't sell. It's just really tough to get Hollywood or anyone excited about drama. But that's sort of what I gravitate towards. So we'll see if I can figure out a way of gussying one of those up in something else. I have a feature version of Into the Dark.
Oh, wow.
As it turns out.
So we get to find out what happened?
There's a whole thing about it. Yes, there's a whole thing. Exactly. There's a whole thing. And I think it's super cool. But so that may be the first one that gets made. Who knows? But I was happy to write it. It was fun to go back and figure out how I can fit in that system, that short film, into a bigger project.
Yeah. It's always nice when a short film could be a bigger project, you know?
For sure.
Yeah.
Many people ask that about The Son of the Father, and that's, for me, that was like that was like a story in itself.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to just something that you said about the short films versus features. And I just want to say is that I love short films because it's an opportunity to direct on a smaller, you know, piece, but also it's learning, so that you don't make those mistakes on bigger projects. Like, you know, there's a lot you can learn in just directing your first, second, third short film. And then once you get up there, then somebody just going right to a feature. I think that's a big jump.
No, I totally agree. It really is an incredible learning ground, as long as people are open to it being a learning ground. I certainly know people who don't learn anything and do the same mistakes over and over and over. So that's one thing, and that's that's probably how they live their life as well, I would assume.
Yes.
But every now and then you meet people who I think do go about it the right way, at least in the way I think it should be done, is that you learn from your mistakes, and it's fine. You know, own where you are. And nobody is perfect in any shape or form, but if you're eager to improve and eager to learn, then your next project automatically will be better. Even if that means you're more ambitious, you may still fail, but at least you're trying something different.
Right.
And so that's why I have a lot of time for people. A lot of people, I do a lot of script doctoring for people. It's something I'm very good at. But even relatively inexperienced writers would sometimes reach out to me, and I'd be like, sure. If I could feel their headspace is in the right sort of attitude and that they're willing to learn, then I'm happy to spend time reading their relatively crappy script, as long as they're open to hearing what they could do better. And then I see the next work and it's better. Then it's really gratifying. So I'm happy to share my time with any sort of level project, as long as I feel like people are serious about it and want to improve and they're into the game, and it's not just for fun or wasting people's time.
Well, and to really value the input, you know, like that you're giving them, because you're giving them your time, your expertise.
Right.
That's the most important, is like just to learn. I always think just to be curious and learn and take the feedback and just listen. Don't argue.
Right. But it's also, I mean, it's fair to be critical, and I don't mind people who push back, because sometimes they just don't hear it.
Right.
They're not sure what they're hearing, so they can push back and go, but I thought it was like this. And I say, well, I can hear that's what you think is on the page, but what you're telling me is not what you've written. Right. And then then they can start getting it. So I don't mind that they push back in terms of clarifying what something might mean to them. But I can immediately tell when people shut down or they get defensive.
Right.
Or
that's what I was more talking about.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what you mean. And then you just know, well, they're not going to improve. And then, well, so that's fine. So I'm not going to help them with their second script. That's fine. But Yeah, exactly. It's a lot about the attitude of how they're approaching getting feedback, and it's a skill set taking feedback.
Yes.
I think in hindsight, I've learned that there are people that are looking to get feedback to hear themselves out loud and
Right.
to make themselves seem more clever. And then they're the ones that are truly helpful, right? So I've always told people, I can read your screenplay and know I would hate this movie. I would never go watch this movie. It's not my genre. I'm bored, shitless. But I can still give you notes as to how you can make your film better, as opposed to giving you notes that'll make it into a film that I would want to watch.
Right.
Those are two completely different things. And when you're starting out, you don't know what that difference is. You don't know which feedback to listen to.
Right.
And so there is a thing of figuring out if that feedback you're getting is helpful, not from an emotional point of view, but is that really the feedback that is going to make my film better, or are they trying to make a film that they want to make, right? And so that takes experience. And that was very confusing initially, to realize not everybody are good at giving helpful feedback. And they don't even realize that they're giving not so helpful feedback. They think they're giving helpful feedback by saying, no, your film should be set in China and the lead should be African-American and be dancing. How cool would that be? It was like, whoa, wait, before I had a film about something else, right?
Right.
So I understand that it's difficult, and it is a skill set to figure out which feedback is actually helpful to you as a writer and to your project.
Yeah, I like that you made the comparison between the two. Because it is very different. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly, it's very different.
Yeah. Do you have any last thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, hopefully not last thoughts in general, but last thoughts for this session.
Yes, for this session.
No, listen, I just think I love I've been checking out your podcast, and I think it's so cool that you're looking into the industry from so many different viewpoints. A lot of people sometimes just go to the biggest, brightest, diamond, which is like the actor, which is just a tiny part of the big cogwheel of this industry. So I love that you're doing the boom operator sometimes, or sound mixer, whatever it is. I love that you're interested in the entire industry. So thank you for having me be part of this. And I'm so excited for what you're doing. And I'm grateful that we met on the set of the short film, which I believe is nearly finished, or is beginning to hit the film circuits, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you. And same back to you. I just am so honored to have you on my show. Thank you so much. You're just the nicest guy on set. It was just such a pleasure. I remember when things were kind of getting a little chaotic. You were just like, hey, you were just a calming force. And it was like, I hadn't seen that. And I was like, oh, that's how it's done. All you have to do is just like take a beat.
Yeah, exactly. Just take a beat. Exactly. We'll get there. No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram @Tammy Magaro. Until we meet again, what's your story?